Welcome to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Of course, I'm your host, JJ Kitchen. We got ourselves a really good show today on tap. Top 10 ACC quarterbacks. Who do we have in the top 10? Who potentially was close to getting the top 10? And is the ACC the quarterback central conference in the U.S. right now, between the SEC, the Big Ten, obviously being the top two brands when it comes to conferences right now, especially with revenues? Can the ACC keep up with quarterbacks? We'll talk about that here today with the top 10 quarterbacks going into 2025. But first, before we kick it off, the show is sponsored by Colonial Beer, located 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA, 15102. Again, anytime you're able to help out a small business like Colonial Beer here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, make sure you go see them at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA, 15102. Tremendous service, great people. Go see them today. Also, the show is sponsored by Thompson Law Group with Brian Thompson. Call them at 724-799-8404 or visit them at thompsonattorney.com. Personally, I use Brian. He does a tremendous job. He cares about you, the individual, and what you need to succeed in the case that you have. If you have any questions, make sure you call him at 724-799-8404 or visit him at thompsonattorney.com. If you have questions, he will be glad to answer them. And lastly, the K Collection Coffee by Austin Kitchen, the coffee brand by the Seattle Mariners pitcher, Austin Kitchen, www.thekingscraft.com. The K Collection, numerous different selections he has there, 3 options right now between espresso. He also has 2 other options there as well. Make sure you head over to www.thekingscraft.com, a great brand that I personally use myself. I personally use the espresso before I go to my office every single day to get myself in the right state of mind, but to really get me going in the morning. Again, the K Collection Coffee by Austin Kitchen, www.thekingscraft.com. But really, let's get into it here today. We'll be starting from number 10. And when you look at the ACC, there's been numerous quarterbacks through the years that you look at the ACC and say they've done a really good job of a number of different players. A school that really stands out when you look at quarterback play, Clemson. They've had Deshaun Watson in the past. They've had Trevor Lawrence in the past. Now Cade Klubnik is there. We'll talk about where Cade ends up in this top 10. Also, North Carolina, Sam Howell was there for a number of years. Now they had Drake May. Now you have new quarterbacks coming in. What does the quarterback situation look like under a new head coach, Bill Belichick, coming from the New England Patriots? Obviously, a guy who's got tremendous acumen when it comes to quarterbacks, worked with Tom Brady, really his entire duration of his career when it comes to the New England Patriots. But we'll watch and see what that looks like. But you look at a guy like Sam Howell, Drake May, he was both there. Then you had the University of Pittsburgh, Kenny Pickett was there, Eli Holstein's there now. But then you even have newer teams like Louisville, where you had numerous guys back to back. You had Shuck there this year. He's going now into the National Football League. He'll get drafted this year. But now you got a guy like Miller Moss that's there. So we'll go over a number of different guys here. But I think the first one that really stands out to me when it comes to number 10, and it was kind of a shock for me, was Tommy Castellanos, a guy that you look at him right now. He comes in, he's a transfer quarterback coming to Florida State from Boston College, got benched at Boston College, wasn't the best fit for a guy like Bill O'Brien, obviously a pro-style quarterback system last year, but then being a senior, being able to bounce back into Tallahassee, we'll watch what that looks like. Personally, when you get benched, that's something you have to watch for. Did not have a good season as it went on. Not sure he handled it very well when it comes to maturity-wise, how he left the team. Really, the minute he was benched as quarterback at Boston College, really hit the transfer portal, didn't really do anything after that in terms of helping out his football team, went into the portal as the season ended. He commits to Florida State. The question I really have for Florida State at this point is, you had DJU last year. It did not work out. Florida State 2-10, multiple issues at the quarterback position, offensive line, even wide receiver. But the quarterback position means the most. And I think there's a lot of questions going on there. I don't think personally that Tommy Castellanos is anywhere near the top when it comes to the top quarterbacks in the ACC, but he's clearly, for me, at number 10. We'll see if he continues to develop. Gus Malzahn, the former head football coach at UCF, resigned at UCF, joins the Florida State Seminoles down in Tallahassee. really starting to take over the reins there. He's worked with multiple dual threat quarterbacks. Mike Norvell really hands the keys over there. We'll watch as this year goes on. But when it comes to quarterback play, I think this will be 2 straight years where you really have to wonder, is Florida State going in the right direction when it comes to quarterback play? At number 9, we've got Chandler Morris out of Virginia, transfer from North Texas, threw for almost 4,000 yards last year, a guy that Lincoln Riley even liked when he was at the University of Southern Cal, a guy who, one, can certainly run the RPO system, but has a tremendous arm from top to bottom. I think he's a guy that has really good footwork. Again, when you almost throw for 4,000 yards, I don't care if it's at the MAC level, the American Conference, whether it's in the Power 4 conference, you're a guy that can play at a high level. Now the question is, going to a place like Virginia, Tony Elliott, he's certainly looking at a place where he's certainly a little bit on the hot seat going into this season. He needs a guy that goes in there and really performs at a high level. So we'll watch this year to see what he looks like. But I think number 9, Chandler Morris, I'm very excited for him to see what he can do when it comes to the University of Virginia. Next up, Kyron Drones, a guy that I think has great potential. We watched him last year, did not turn out to be the quarterback that we thought he was going to be. Again, I think he's I think he's a dual threat quarterback, a guy that I think that can really start to have a bit of success. He needs to have weapons around him. He needs to have people around him. He finished 2023 season with expectations that are a little bit higher. Again, a guy from even the notes that I have here, a guy that was injured numerous times last year. I think he has a real potential to bounce back this year. But again, he needs guys around him. I think that when you look at overall Virginia Tech's offense, they've added some key pieces to that offense. Brent Pry is a guy that I think that he went out and he kind of sees where Virginia Tech needs to go. Virginia Tech has certainly been very, as I want to say, very compliant with a guy like him, where Pry really is in the hot seat this year. I think that he really needs to win. Kyron Drones, I think, has a real potential to step up in numerous ways to where he can get a lot better. I have him at the number 8 position. At number 7, I've got Haynes King, and a guy that it feels like he's been there for almost 10 years. When you look at Haynes, I think he's in a great situation that fits his mold of quarterback, which is really old school. A guy that's certainly not going to throw for 300 yards a game. He'll be in that range of 150 to 200 yards per game. He has a great offensive line. I think when you look at Georgia State, they've done a great job of recruiting the defensive line, but more importantly, the offensive line that allows them to be a physical, tough football team and being able to run the football at a high pace. I think overall, when you watch this football team, you saw a number of games last year. I think personally, when I watched the Georgia Tech-Georgia game, there were numerous bad calls against Georgia Tech. I think if those calls were made corrected, Georgia Tech wins that football game. I think Brent Key, a guy that continues to build the program that he's looking for, a disciple of Nick Saban. He's building that football team like he wants it, and it really identifies to himself. Physical, tough, not shying away from contact. They certainly love to run the football at Georgia Tech. I have a team like Georgia Tech with Haynes King on the rise this year. I think that how they run the football, how they develop a ground game, how they're physical, RPO, Haynes King can certainly run it as well. We've seen that in numerous of times, especially in the first game of the year when they beat Florida State over in Ireland this past year. I think he's got more potential there. Again, he's not going to be a guy that throws for 300 yards, 5 touchdowns, but a guy who's a tremendous game manager, and I think can really put Georgia Tech into a range where they win 8, 9, potentially even 10 games if things go correctly on the offensive side of the football and they really play keep away to that extent. At number 6, Darian Mensah, and this is a really good prospect that I looked at. You see the potential he had when he comes from a guy. He goes to Duke, which is pretty crazy. Duke spending a lot of money at the quarterback position. They have certainly upped their game when it comes to NIL. Mensah, guy comes over from Tulane. Duke basically allows Malik Murphy to hit the portal. He goes out and does his own thing. He goes out and gets his own bag. But I think, in my personal opinion, Darian Mensah is that much of a better quarterback. We'll continue to watch and see what Manny Diaz does. Manny Diaz goes into his second year at Duke University. I think, again, Manny Diaz, one of the better defensive minds in the ACC. I think he's certainly top three when it comes to defensive coordinators or defensive-minded head football coaches. Darian Mensah, a guy who can certainly run the RPO system. From my notes here, he's got a number of different attributes that I look at. One, had an appearance at the AAC title game and also threw for 2,723 yards, 22 touchdowns, and also added another 132 yards on the ground. His 9.5 yards per average tied third nationally among FBS quarterbacks. I think personally, for right now, for a guy, when you look at the transfer portal, Duke did themselves a hell of a favor. I think that when I first watched Malik Murphy hit the portal, I was a little concerned, but had no idea they were going to go with a quarterback like Darian Mensah. In my opinion, one of the better ads in the ACC going into 2025. And I think that when you look at this team from top to bottom, they got a lot of different portal additions to this offense, but they're going to have a great defense. They're always going to be physical on that side of the football. You saw Duke make a run last year, certainly identify as a Manny Diaz football team, really good on the defensive side of the football. You want to see the offense take that next step. I think when you look at this team, high potential. Darian Mensah is going to be a guy that I think really takes them to another level to where they add 8+ wins this year, and a potential, if things go their way, make things interesting when it comes to the playoffs or even a major contention for the ACC title game this year. A team to watch and certainly a player to watch, Darian Mensah. At number 5, I got Eli Holstein out of Pitt. In the beginning of the year, a guy that really took off, had a number of good comeback wins. You saw a guy that in the beginning of games was a little bit shy, made some mistakes in those football games, but then towards the end of those football games, like Cincinnati, a 21-point comeback. You saw him, especially in the second half, 3 touchdown passes, over 70% completion percentage in those games. Cincinnati, a comeback, 21-point comeback. West Virginia the next week after that at home. A 10-point comeback, wins that football game, throws for over 300 yards again, 3 touchdown passes again. But in the second half of the season, went through a number of different injuries, had concussions, certainly out a number of different times. I think you saw him. That's why he tailed off towards the end of the year. But also up front, you got to protect the quarterback. I think this is a guy that can really take off this year. He's got a number of different playmakers on the outside, like a Deuce Span, wide receiver transfer from Florida State, Andy Jean, wide receiver transfer from Florida. Number of different additions up front. Jeff Percy at left tackle from the University of Michigan. I think that'll be a major benefit. Obviously, Kenny Johnson returning at the wide receiver position for him as well. I think this is a very big opportunity. Cade Bell loves to score points, was top 20 in the country when it comes to scoring points. He's done a good job. It's year 2 of that offense. I think he takes that next step and really solidifies himself as a top 5 quarterback in the ACC, and potentially another year away from potentially going to the National Football League and the NFL draft. At number 4, Kevin Jennings. People probably in their mind think about the last game of the year he had versus Penn State. I don't think that's how I identify Kevin Jennings, as one bad game, and certainly in the playoffs up north in the cold. I look at this guy from a full context of the full season. He comes in, takes over at the quarterback position at SMU, and just takes off. Was undefeated all the way through until the championship game, the ACC championship game against Clemson. Thought he did a hell of a job in that football game. You saw him as an RPO guy. I certainly watched him against Pitt. Tremendous quarterback play where he was able to make a number of different throws. A guy who can play the RPO system tremendously well. He moves very well, able to make throws on the move. And then SMU, they got all the oil money down there. I think that's a team that continues to add in the portal. They did a really good job again. They did a good job of also adding talent up front on the offensive line. Again, me personally, I'm a big guy. Offensive line and defensive line is the way to go, and how teams really, you can tell how well they're going to be, because if you control the line of scrimmage, you can do a lot of dangerous stuff when it comes to the football season. But going into the extra part of things, when it comes to playoffs or any contention for the ACC, you got to dominate up front and be very aggressive when it comes to offensive line play. Kevin Jennings, again, a guy can run, make those tight window throws, but also make throws on the run and awkward throws as well, where his feet are not in the great technical space, but a guy can certainly make those plays when you need to, when it comes down to it. Now we go to the top 3. For me, I'm putting up here, and really I think that this makes a lot of sense on a number of different angles for me. Again, Miller Moss, of One, he comes from USC. I think, for me personally, I don't think that the problems that you saw with Miller Moss at USC was fully on him. I think that the defensive side of the football certainly did not help the way they weren't able to, to keep teams off the field. Uh, Lincoln Riley at USC does not have a defense there ever. While I agree with Lincoln Riley having good offenses, I think that a lot of the injuries did not help him. The offensive line play was absolutely atrocious. But you watch this guy, Miller Moss, he's got a tremendous arm. He's able to make tight window throws. Again, an RPO guy, certainly not agile to the point where he's like a Kevin Jennings, or you watch some of these guys like a Haynes King, where they're able to really move and be more of a mobile quarterback to where they're able to move at a high pace. This guy, he's got the agility to move around, but he's a guy that you love to see throw the football. A guy that I think can stand in the pocket, make those tough throws, does not mind getting hit, certainly not scared to get hit. A guy who truly embraces being able to put the ball on the money. I think that a Miller Moss guy at Louisville, especially with a Jeff Brom, which I consider to be a quarterback whisperer. I think Jeff Brom's done a great job since his time he's got back to Louisville. He's got a lot more resources than what he had at Purdue. He's been able to add a lot at the quarterback position. He had Plummer to begin with. Plummer his first year. You saw Shuck last year. And his third year, he's going to go with a guy like Miller Moss. And I expect great quarterback play from Louisville because Jeff Brom. Jeff Brom is a guy that you need to watch out for. And when you look at the offenses overall, he's done a hell of a job. I think he continues to show major progressions from top to bottom. And I think it's only get better this year. They've added a lot of talent, especially on the outside, the wide receiver position from the transfer portal. I think that Miller Moss will be in a much better position, and watch this guy continue to grow and jump to the next level with the tutelage of a guy like Jeff Brom, who's, in my opinion, a tremendous quarterbacks coach and a quarterback whisperer. Number two, down to the final two. I think these were really the two easiest for me. And at number two, I got Carson Beck. Carson Beck, for a number of reasons, comes over from the University of Georgia, goes to Miami. I think that he's going to have talent at both spots. The question I think that a lot of people might have is, focusing on football. He certainly has the Cavender twins. Obviously, he's dating one of those, but now eventually goes to a breakup. Does he continue to focus on football? Miami's always been that type of a place where you've got a lot of things to do outside of playing football. I think for him, a guy like last year, in my opinion, was going in to be one of the top signal callers. Again, I have the notes here. 3,485 yards passing, 28 touchdowns, guided Georgia to an SEC championship game. Unfortunately, suffered an injury, didn't play in the postseason. A guy that I thought Georgia probably would have moved farther if Carson Beck plays in those games. I think they beat a couple of those teams, especially like a Notre Dame. They go to move on to those next rounds, probably face a team like Penn State. Georgia probably wins that football game as well. I think Carson Beck is certainly one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC. Still, a number of different ways for him to get better, especially going into the next level of the NFL draft next year. But I expect him to really make those rounds when it comes to Miami's offense. They've done a good job of attacking the portal for a couple additions up front, not many. They already had a lot of returning guys. But you look at the wide receiver position, they got a number of different onset guys that you can put to the outside. Personally, I've said this before, really the last 2 years, I think Miami has the best roster, but it's getting that best roster to perform at a high level. Mario Cristobal needs to take that next step this year. You can't falter like you did last year. You had a guy like Cam Ward, certainly went to a number of distances there, but couldn't finish the job. Had too many losses that really cost him towards the end of the year. But you saw what this team possibly can be. Mario Cristobal has to show that. And I think Carson Beck, having him come over from Georgia, is a massive factor. And last but not least, the number one quarterback, I think, is Cade Klubnik. You watched the development really last year, took a step forward, especially towards the end of 2025. You watched him throughout the year. I saw him play here in Acrisure Stadium here in Pittsburgh. He had a hell of a game there. Finished the year with 3,639 yards passing, 36 touchdown passes, and also added 463 yards on the ground. Certainly a dual threat quarterback. Saw him run for a number of different times. Only threw 6 interceptions from last year. I think that when you look at this guy, he's certainly taken that next level. Garrett Riley, the offensive coordinator at Clemson, has done a good job. He continues to allow him to go to that next level. I think that Dabo's finally allowing Garrett Riley to really take over this offense and really make it zone, not making it the Clemson offense, but making it Garrett. And I think it continues to move on from a number of different levels. So my number one quarterback is Cade Klubnik. Guys, in the comment section, let me know, who did I miss? Who did possibly not make the top 10? And my number 11 was the Cal quarterback situation. They bring in two quarterbacks, former five-star quarterbacks from who did I have here? Five-star quarterbacks from Ohio State and Oregon. Ohio State and Oregon, Devin Brown being one of those guys. I still think it's a potential quarterback room to watch, especially one of those guys are obviously going to win that position. And it's two former five-star recruits. You'd have to think one of them is going to be good. But the question is, when it comes to actual pieces around in the Cal system on offense, Brian Harsin, the new offensive coordinator at Cal, I think he can take that offense to the next level. But you got to be able to see what the actual weapons around you. Can that really help those young quarterbacks? That's the question, and that's the question Brian Harsin needs to answer. Guys, let me know in the comment section down below, who did I miss? Who was your top 10? Again, like this video, subscribe to the podcast. This is where you're going to get all your ACC, Pitt, and conference realignment news. Make sure you guys subscribe down below. Two easy things: subscribe, like, let me know your comments. What did I miss? Who's in here that shouldn't be in here? Who's a quarterback that you wanted to see in the top 10? Guys, appreciate you tuning in to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. As always and forever, hail to Pitt and hail to the ACC. I'll see you next time.